Before we get started, I just want to mention that I'm very honored we have a guest speaker today, Dr. Ken Goldberg, one of our staff. And so he's going to be finishing the relationship series talking about healthy sexual relationships. We'll get into that in a couple of minutes. I just want to start off with our reading for today from the Codependency book. September 10th. Most of us want to be liked. We want other people to think of us as nice, friendly, kind, and loving. Most of us want the approval of others. Since childhood, some of us have been trying to get approval, trying to get people to like us and think highly of us. Maybe afraid people will leave us if they disapprove of our actions. We look for approval from people who have none to give. In order to live happily, we to live consistently with the way God wants us to live. We try to tap into a way of life that is in harmony with the universe. We need to let go of our extreme need for approval. These unmet needs for approval and love from our past give others control over us today. In short, we can approve of ourselves. In the end, that's the only approval that counts. Today, I will let go of my need for approval and my need to be liked. I will replace them with a need to like and approve of myself. Okay. I just want to mention one thing before I introduce Ken. Next week, we'll start the series we'll do the gratitude series starting next week. You can check that out on the website. Okay. As I mentioned before, I'm very happy and very grateful to have Dr. Ken Goldberg here today. And Ken basically has worked very hard on a podcast that he did based around the concept of, and an article based around the concept of today's topic. So I'm going to shut up and just give it over to Ken and let him take over. And I'm going to do something I rarely do. I'm going to listen. So Ken, it's all yours.
Well, thank you, Vince. I appreciate it. And I want to let you know also that I feel grateful to you. I know you and I have had some discussions about uh, human sexuality, particularly sex as you get older. And I detect there are some differences in the way we see things, but I think very much in keeping with your philosophy, the way you've set up starting point, the way you have therapists of all different stripes and all different beliefs, being able to practice together, I just very much appreciate giving me this forum. And I know last week you talked about sex and relationships, and my topic is healthy sexual relationships. So in some ways, we're pretty much overlapping our topics, and people that will have listened to both of us will hear two perspectives that'll be similar and different in different ways. And I think it's a credit to you that you have always supported that. Now, I also know that it says on the website that today's lecture is supposed to be conversations on codependency. And I guess I just want to let people know that if you were coming here hoping for that topic, think of what I'm saying as somewhat the flip side of that. Because, a lot of times we talk about pathologies, what's wrong, controlling aberrant behaviors. And I want to think on the positive side in terms of not just what we don't want to do, but what would we do instead? I'm very aware that a lot of times that if in my 47 years as a psychologist, I mean, I've heard people talk about all sorts of problems. Sometimes they talk about relationship problems, sexual problems. If people are really having a good relationship and they're having a good sexual experience, they don't tell me. They don't come in to tell me that. I have very little information from my clientele over all these years. I've seen countless people actually describing what went into a good relationship. They may be there to talk about something else, but they don't talk about it. It's also true among friends. I go back to a time, I remember my wife and I had four couples over, and I can just picture us sitting in our backyard, kind of like a barbecue. It's a summer evening. And two of the couples were just they were just beating each other's up verbally. They just came up with one bad thing after another to say to those people, to their partner. And we were just sitting there listening. And then there was a third couple that seemed in between. They almost seemed like they wanted to get in the act and they were struggling to find enough bad things to say about each other because they didn't want to be left out. And then there was my wife and me and another couple, and we were stone silent. I mean, we just listened because we didn't have anything to say to contribute to the conversation. And I just thought, well, I guess these other people have a good relationship. But I don't even know that. I think back to you never really know what's going on in someone's life. I think back sometimes to I think it was the 2000 Democratic Convention, I'm not sure, where Al Gore had that kind of iconic kiss with Tipper Gore. I think it caught everyone off guard, this very passionate kiss. And then 10 years later, we learn they separate. And who knows what went on in between? We just don't know. And the reality is, many people think that relationships are going to go downhill. They don't have models, they don't have a basis to look at a human relationship and see that it works. Well, so that's always puzzled me. I've always thought about it. Uh, but I didn't get into the issue of talking about sex. Actually, it was kind of serendipitous. I was talking to my urologist, and most men my age have a urologist. And uh, one day he tells me that he's been quoting me, although anonymously, I want to make sure there was no HIPAA violation. And he was quoting me to people. And I was surprised because I didn't know for sure what I had said that he liked. But I think in retrospect, it may have been because he was getting married, and I think I was giving him some advice. And and he said to me, I don't know what to do. He said that I can do all sorts of things. Men, they have erectile dysfunction, they're seeing changes in their sexual response, and and they're in despair, and they're saying, I just can't please my wife the way I used to. And my first response to him was, well, did they ever ask her what she wanted? It is a very simple question. What do you mean that you didn't please her? Are you back in a time when, you were acrobatic in bed and you screamed with delight? Or are you in the moment where you're actually finding out what the person wants? And I think when we talk about sex and we talk about committed long-term relationships, I think there is a real interplay. I think that good relationships lead to good sex, and good sex continue to build up good relationships. And I also believe, and I know from personal experience, that that can be sustained through the course of a relationship. I've been with my wife for 45 years, and this is the extent of what I'm going to say about that relationship, but that it's just always part of it. And in fact, at some points, I even wonder, why did anybody ever stop having sex? Well, how does that ever happen that you're with someone and how do you make the decision that we're not doing this anymore? And I've thought about it, and this has led me to the idea of talking about what goes into a healthy sexual relationship. Well, in the simplest terms, I think if you think you have a healthy sexual relationship, you do. My model, your model, anybody's model, they're not going to be the same. We're not identical. We don't all experience the world the same. So there's not one pattern fits all. People have different ways that they can have these healthy relationships. I do think there are people that are happy with their relationships, but they've just stopped having sex. I have a little trouble understanding that. And there are people that have this great sex, but they have an awful relationship. And that may be what some of you, when you talked about codependency, that may be what happens in a lot of codependent relationships. People beat each other up verbally, maybe physically. They don't respect each other. It's horrible. And then suddenly they get into bed and they have an exciting time and they think that's great sex. Well, to me, that's not a healthy sexual relationship. Somehow, for a healthy sexual relationship, really involves, I think, two parts. One is how you relate to each other out of bed and how you relate to each other in bed. And I think both components are equally important. So again, if you feel you have a healthy relationship, a healthy sexual relationship, fine. Anything I say that may or may not add to that. But I would like to throw out a couple concepts that I've gleaned from the work I've done with people around their sexuality and also coming from my own experiences. The first thing that I think is really important to keep in mind is that sex is something we learn. I mean, we most people innately, know what to do in terms of having sex with another person. But that doesn't mean we really know how to make love. It doesn't mean we really know how to relate to another person in a very personal and intimate way. I have to think back to my teenage years. Now, when I was a teenager, and I suddenly began to notice girls and started to have desires and drives and feelings that I hadn't had before. What did I know? I didn't know anything. I can remember the things we talked about what girls wanted, what they wanted. Somehow you thought that if driving in a car and called out to a girl on the street. Somehow you think she'd want that. I mean, obviously she didn't want it, but we would have these jokes and we'd say things. In many ways, we were not good to women, to girls. I mean, well, I don't know that I did anything terrible, but I had no idea what it was like to be with a girl. And it was a new and very very trying times. Teenage, I think, is that way for many of us. And I think it's important. I think a lot of times, I know as a young boy, as a teenage boy, you would sort of tout your prowess as if you knew what to do, but you don't know what to do. And I think when you take a perspective that you learn through experiences and that you learn as you go along the way, and that you're always open to learning more, it actually primes you for having good, loving relationships. In ways people may not think this. I mean, I remember I had in one of the podcasts, I was with another therapist, and we were talking about the honeymoon period and how the honeymoon period ends. Well, actually, I think sex can get better and better and better throughout a course of a lifetime. And what makes it better is not necessarily that your body is getting better. I mean, the reality is we're all facing death. Mortality is a given, and none of us, and all of us will find some changes in our physical abilities. We'll find changes in our sexual responses, in our hormones change. All sorts of things change. But what can continue to make things better is an openness to learning, an openness to learning in the context of an intimate partner. Who am I and who are you? What do I need and what do you need? And if in that bond you continue to open yourself up to learning more about your partner and divulging more about yourself, the honeymoon period, which may somewhere in the back of your head seem like what was the best, isn't really necessarily the best. I mean, it may be, a very strong, hormonally, passionately driven time, but it's not necessarily the best because if you continue to know your partner better and be known by your partner better, and are open to learning more, it can continuously get better over a course of a lifetime. Now, going back to the honeymoon period, I remember having this podcast. And one of the things about the honeymoon period is it is what is inevitable. What's inevitable in any relationship is differences. No matter how much you merge, you bond, you sometimes feel like two are now one. No matter how much you feel that you're two different people. And inevitably, the differences that get masked when you're at a period of really strong romantic excitement, those differences eventually have to emerge. Now, in heterosexual relationships, and I want to make clear that these differences can occur in gay and lesbian relationships as well. They'll happen in every relationship because they're two different people. But I put the focus on heterosexual because I do think there is a difference between men and women that tends to come up for many couples. We know men and women are physically built differently, and we know they're hormonally different. And one thing about male sexuality that is often different from female sexuality, and I don't mean to overgeneralize because not everybody is the same, but male sexuality tends to be compulsive. Female sexuality tends to be contextual, relational. Again, not true for everybody. Don't take this as the end word, but it is a difference that occurs. And sometimes when we talk about sexual addictions, it is important to distinguish some type of addictive process that really interferes with a person's life and a certain kind of natural compulsivity that exists in male sexuality. Men tend to be driven by different hormones and tend to be compulsive. Women like context, you know, and one of the things, and I really have to credit my wife more so than me with this insight. But one thing that is common is men and women want sex and men and women want closeness. Men often, the sex is the conduit to intimacy. It's the physical act that helps men feel close. For women, the context, the closeness, the good feeling are often the prelude to sex. And if you understand that both people want, in a sense, the same thing, you then can figure out how to manage the differences. But for many couples, what ends up happening is they get into conflict. And the conflict they get into is typically, commonly, men will feel like women are withholding. Commonly, often, women will feel that they're being used as receptacles and objects by men. And then the sexuality shuts down with conflict. They may fight. It shuts down with withdrawal. They may not be the fighting type, but they start to back away from each other. Compromise is better than withdrawal, which is better than battling, cats and dogs. It's better than that. But actually, compromise is not even as good as what I'll call collaboration, because compromise makes the assumption that in this partnership, one person gives something up, and then and another time the other one gives something up, which, and again, it's better than just battling, but there's a quality of collaboration in which you sort of take a look at the reality. You look at who you are, you look at who your partner is, you're honest with each other about your needs. You don't battle over your needs, you just state your needs, and then you jointly figure out what you're going to do. what are you going to do when you're two people? It could be a gender-based need, as I said, with that stereotype I gave with male and female sexuality. It could not be a gender-based issue. But what do you do about the fact you're a partnership, and how do you look to maximally meet each one of your needs? You're not compromising, you're not sacrificing. True, you may not get everything you want, but you're working jointly to maximize the experience of each of them. Now, in that line, I talk a lot about experimentation. And actually, I thought I got ahead of myself when I mentioned the podcast. When I brought up experimentation in that podcast, the other therapist said something like, well, it adds spice to the relationship. You experiment, so you add spice. And I said, well, maybe, but that's not what I'm referring to. I believe a lot in sexual experimentation, not to add spice to your life, but to add repertoire, to create a menu. Because one of the things that you can do in a healthy sexual relationship, recognizing that you're two different people, understanding you have needs, understanding that your needs are not identical. One of the things you can do is you can start coming up with the question is not, do you want to have sex tonight? The question almost turns into, so what type of sex do you want to have tonight? So if one person has a certain need and the other person has the other need, if you open yourself up to experimentation, and I'm not saying one should just do anything, has to do things they don't want to do, but if there are things you're willing to try, or even things you're reasonably willing to try, you can jointly come up with a menu. And actually, I after coming up having these ideas, I know I took some workshops, and it's exactly what the sex therapists were saying in these professional workshops. You create a menu, and if you have a menu in a healthy relationship, you get away from the idea that someone is just rejected and deprived, but you get more into the idea of, well, what will work tonight? And what works tonight may be different for tomorrow night. And maybe one night you shouldn't do anything. But however you work it out, you start working as a partnership. You you create a repertoire, you create a menu, and then you begin to realize that there are ways that nobody has to feel used and nobody has to feel deprived. And again, that doesn't mean every moment that you have a desire, something happens, but you work collectively at considering how you're going to relate in a romantic way that's going to work for both of you. I mean, I can't, I said I wasn't going to talk much about my relationship, but hey, this one thing, I can't ever think of a time in 45 years that either my wife or I have ever said no to the other one. It just doesn't happen. I mean, maybe can you wait for tomorrow? Can we wait till tomorrow or so? But nobody ever says no because the feeling is that you're here together, you're close, you're intimate in every way. You really care about each other. You care about each other's needs. You care about each other's non-sexual needs, and you care about each other's sexual needs. And then you work together as a team, not in combat with each other, but collectively to just figure out what to do. Um, I'd like to mention a couple of other things about this. One of the things is what I call the desire trap. I think I think people get stuck in a desire trap. I think people get stuck, people remember a time in the past when when desires were very strong and passions were strong. Again, honeymoon period, even after what everyone calls honeymoon, honeymoon period. You're young and you have very powerful desires. And people end up, I think people fail to recognize that desire is one basis to engage sexually, but it's not the only way to engage sexually. That desire leads to arousal, leads to satisfaction, but but sexual activity in a healthy relationship can lead to arousal, and that becomes the desire. It's like if you have a memory that you two have worked well as a partnership, and maybe you don't have burning desires, but you know that from your experience, sex has been good. You know from your experience that you feel good afterwards. You know from your experience that you feel a little closer to your partner. You didn't have to feel the desire to engage. But a lot of people get stuck on the desire. They have to have the desire. If you think about it, sex is a decision. It's not a desire. I mean, I can think back when I was a, teenager, again, when we had ridiculous ideas. And back in my teenage years, you'd think she she really wanted it. Well, maybe maybe this girl really was aroused and was flirtatious and had some interest, but she made a decision no. She made the decision. Well, all the desire in the world that she may have conveyed to you has nothing to do with her decision. If she decided she didn't want to have sex and you push yourself on her, it's rape. I mean, it's that simple. She has to make the decision. You have to make the decision, um, and, and that's true throughout a lifetime. It's always a decision. It's never desire is just a component of the decision making. It's always a decision. And if you again are working collaboratively with a partner in a healthy relationship where you have a great deal of respect for each other, you don't just put each other down. You don't, you may tease. I mean, some couples like to tease a lot, but you're not mean. I think about a phrase. I used to go to Al Anon because I have a son who had an addiction problem. And it was very helpful for me. And I remember one of the slogans was, say what you mean what you say, and don't say it mean. And in a sense, in a relationship, if you say what you mean to your partner and you expect to be heard, uh, you're not mean about it, and you expect to be listened to. And listening to does not mean that there's agreement. So I just encourage people. I know it seems to me very clear that that desire is it takes you is important, but it takes you a little bit off target in a long-term relationship. And in fact, talking about long-term relationships, and I'm assuming we're talking about long-term monogamous relationships. I know that there's a lot of people these days, a lot of the young people are getting into polyamorous relationships, and it's something I have a little trouble understanding. And the best way I understand it is that I just think about myself going through the 60s, and my parents couldn't understand what we were doing. You know, we would live together, without being married, and it was like, I mean, that was just absolutely unbelievable to my parents. So I just assumed whatever difficulty I have with what the younger generation seems to be doing, it can't be any more distant than the difficulties my parents and my wife's parents had with the way we lived our lives. But assuming we're talking about monogamous relationships, one of the things that I emphasize to people is that monogamy is a two-sided coin. one side of the coin is a restriction. You've agreed that you're going to limit your sexual activity to this one partner. And even with that, uh, there's a lot of room for interpretation about what monogamy means. I mean, for some people, having sex with another person is a violation of the monogamous contract. But to other people, having a flirtation is. For other people, just having a friend of the opposite sex is a violation. For some, looking at nude pictures or pornography is a violation. For others, it's not a violation. Some couples look at each other's phones and they're checking, is there a message here, a message there? Couples, in many ways, for that side of the monogamous two-sided coin, they have a need to figure out and come to some agreement. Well, what do they mean? What is it that they actually don't think the other one should be able to do? I mean, honestly, my wife and I would be the easiest people to cheat on each other because we have always accepted that we can have friends of any gender and have close contact, and but we're still monogamous. But that is one side of monogamy, is the restriction against whatever it is you understand with your partner you're not supposed to do. But the other side of the monogamous two-sided coin is fulfillment. We don't get into relationships just because we love to have people tell us what we can't do. I mean, nobody goes there and says, "Oh, I'll be with this woman or this man because now I'll be restricted for the rest of my life." You don't go in with that idea. You go in with the idea of fulfillment. And so often, when you talk to people, they are so focused on what their partner can't do, maybe what their partner has done. Maybe the partner's cheated on them. Maybe you have a suspicion they've cheated. Maybe it's a cheating of the mind, something they never even acted on, but they've gotten consumed with another person. But whatever the restriction is, the whole side of fulfillment gets lost. It just gets thrown out the window. I mean, in 47 years as a psychologist, I cannot tell you just how many people come in and talk about being cheated on and hardly ever talk about what they want. Well, it sounds like the only thing they want is to not be cheated on. They hardly ever talk about what do you want. You've gone into this agreement with another human being for a reason, and it wasn't just to be held back. And it's because you want something. Even in an affair, we're always sympathetic and understanding of the aggrieved party. But so many people have trouble then getting to the question of, well, what do you each want? What do you want? What would be fulfillment? What is this saying to you? I mean, I can think of couples I've seen where someone had an affair, and the question is asked, why did you have an affair? And the answer is, well, it meant nothing. Well, it can't have meant nothing. It meant something. I mean, maybe it just meant that it built your ego, that you felt like a super stud because you had this affair. Maybe that's what it means. Maybe when you're saying it meant nothing, maybe you mean that I'm not in love with this person. It's not, you're still the love of my life. That may be very true, but it means something. And people, I think, have difficulty taking out of these events what the message is, what it is you learn about your partner, what's good about it. And in fact, when people talk about toxic relationships, and I'm very much in favor of helping people get out of patterns of toxic relationships, get out of not have to be in codependent relationships. I certainly want to help people free themselves from that. But one question I typically ask people when they talk about this horrible person they were with, one of the things I ask them is, well, what was good about the relationship? The truth is, if you come in and talk to me about your toxic relationship, I can guarantee you if the partner came to see me in therapy, I'd be sympathetic to the partner's point of view. I listen to whoever is talking to me. And, if we get away from the idea that the world, that there's all these, that people are either good or they're devils, but they're just human beings. Well, in a way, if you walk out of that toxic relationship thinking that you made the most horrible error of your life and there was nothing to learn about yourself in your choice of this person, all you're doing is making yourself feel bad. Now, it's true, you may want to stop the pattern and you may go to a group and get help stopping the pattern, go to a therapist. That's all well and good. But it's also important to take the message. What did I learn from that relationship? I mentioned that I've been with my wife for 45 years. This is my third major relationship. My second relationship was an improvement over my first. My marriage is an improvement over the second. I sometimes kid my wife. I say, I'm on such a roll, can't wait for number four. You learn from your past experiences. And whether it's a past experience with one person, whether it's been a couple of relationships, you want to not just, yeah, I feel like we don't want to just reduce everything to toxicity and bad judgment and making bad choices, picking bad people. I think we need to try to extract what it was that was positive that caused us to be with this person, what danger signals we didn't pay attention to and need to pay attention in the future, and how we can develop an understanding of ourselves in relationship through our relationships with with different people. So I I want to focus. I guess I want to make it clear that we want to, I think, in healthy relationships, you want to stay in the moment. I feel like one of the difficulties people run into is they think of sex as performance and ego. They think I have to perform and I have to and my value is based on that. Sex is really about sensation and intimacy. And that's a confusion that many people make, and certainly a confusion I made early in my life as a young person, not understanding sex. But you get focused on how well did I do? How well did I perform? What sort of a stud am I? What's my value in terms of how I've come across sexually? But if you let yourself learn, and I mentioned that in the beginning, you let yourself learn and grow, you start to realize you want to feel good. You want your partner to feel good. You want to feel close. And between the sense of positive sensations and the experience of bonding and intimacy, that's really the prize in a good sexual relationship. It's interesting. I do a number of things to try to keep myself young, which obviously I can't keep myself young because every year I'm getting older. But I do things like exercise and diet and stuff. And one of the things I do is every morning I do between 1 hour to 1.5 hour of puzzles, just because they keep me cognitively sharp. And one of the puzzles I'm actually personally good at is cryptograms, decoding. And it's interesting because the other day I decoded a message, and they're always by some famous philosopher or something. And I got this message from Kierkegaard that caught my attention, knowing I'm going to speak. And what Kierkegaard said is life is not a problem to be solved, but a reality to be experienced. And I think that there's something very profound in that, that is not a problem to be solved, but a reality to be experienced. And with that, I want to, and I see I have a little bit of time left, and maybe we'll even have time for some questions. I want to get into the issue of sexual problems because one of the things that does cause people to pull back from sexuality is as their bodies are not functioning the way they did before. You get older, you have arthritis. I have arthritis. My wife has arthritis. Your body doesn't move the way it did before. You get older, erection, ejaculation for men changes. I see a urologist. I mean, those things happen. You don't respond exactly the way you did before. Uh, Women may have vaginal dryness. Both men and women may feel a diminishing in desire. And it's in fact, I was talking to a therapist, one of my colleagues, about sex before, and she asked me the question, well, what about the problem of reduced desire? And we got interrupted. We never got back to the discussion. I've been wanting to get back to it. And again, life is not a problem to be solved. It's a reality to be experienced. Is lowered sexual desire a problem, or is it just a reality that you experience? Is erectile dysfunction a problem, or is it a reality that you experience? Is, you know, vaginal dryness or ejaculation problem, are these things problems, or are they just the realities that you're experiencing because you're at that stage of your life? If you think of them as realities and not as problems, then you get back to the question I talked before about the desire trap. Not do you withdraw from intimacy and sexuality? Do you withdraw from it, or do you figure out collaboratively what are you going to do, noting your desire is less? Maybe you try having sex without desire, and then you take note of how it feels. Maybe you find that really wasn't so good. We don't really want to do that again. And you don't do it again. But maybe you find, hey, that was really nice. That was intimate. That was close. That was personal. Yes, we love people. We love our parents. We love our kids. We love various people in our lives. But this is the person you actually have this type of highly intimate contact with. So maybe you don't have desire, but it feels good that you touched each other and stimulated each other. And then if you remember that that experience felt good, that becomes the basis for the next time. You may not be feeling desire, but you decide this is a good idea. This is what we'll do tonight, and we're going to do it. And then the other things, erectile dysfunction. I mean, there are multiple approaches to that are very effective. As my urologist said, he said he can help almost any man have an erection. The problem is he doesn't know how to get them out of their head that they weren't back where they were in the past, that they think they have to be there, when in fact, if they can be in the moment, there's a much greater degree of satisfaction that they weren't expecting. And that's why he started sending people to me. And I'm going to tell you, when I see people, I've seen people that are older, they're in my age group, and they tell me they haven't had sex for a year, for 2 years, for 5 years, for 10 years. They like their partners, but but it's disturbing to them. And we think of therapy as a complex long-term process, but I think of it as kind of simple. And one of the first things I say, and so this has been mostly men, when they tell me that this is an issue for them, is I tell them, go to your partner, tell your partner, I want to talk to you about something. Don't catch her in the spur of the moment. Don't catch her while she's in the middle of doing the dishes or, watching a TV. Say, I'd want to talk to you. Get together, talk to her, say, listen, I have something to say. I want you to listen. I don't want to fight about it. I just want you to hear me. And by the way, that's, as an aside, that's an important issue in communication. I tell people often, communication is much more about listening than it is about speaking. Communication is about hearing the other person. We need to hear what the other person says. And when you're the person that's listening, you need to know that hearing and not interrupting is not the same as agreeing. You may disagree, but you have to absorb it. You have to hear what your partner says. You can at another time come back and say, I thought about it. I don't agree with you. People jump right off the bat to tell them. So that was a little bit of an aside. But what I tell people, what I tell guys, and it's had a lot of success. I'm actually a little surprised how much success it's had. I've tell guys, go to your partner, tell her you want to talk to her, sit down with her, and tell her, whether it's a year, 2 years, 10 years without sex, tell her, I would like to resume a sexual relationship. Just tell her that. Tell her, this is what I want. Don't fight about it. Don't argue about it. If she starts to interrupt, put your hand up. Hold on, you can talk. Let me just finish this. I would like to resume a sexual relationship. And surprisingly, it's surprising to them. It actually was a little surprising to me after I first did it. The women are receptive. They're more receptive. But then the second step is not just telling them what you want, but then listening to your partner about what she wants and being able to say, I'd like to resume this. What do you want? Because what often happens is if you've been plowing ahead with a sexual relationship on your own terms, them speaking about guys, because I think guys, this happens to guys a lot. You're plowing ahead, the woman responds, you're not paying attention to what she's really feeling, and eventually she's getting tired of it. And you think you've been satisfying her. That reminds me, when my son was in Little League, there was a kid that ran from home plate to first base. He was one of the slowest runners. And one of the other coaches offhand said, I can satisfy my wife 5 times in the time it takes Brian to get to first base. And the guys are all laughing. And I'm listening to this and I'm thinking, what do you mean you can satisfy her 5 times? Have you ever even stopped to ask her what she wants? And I think sometimes people just go forward without stopping to know their partner. And then they hit a stage where someone says, I can't do this anymore. And they stop it. And then they stop it for long periods of time. And anyway, I could probably talk more, but I think I've shared the bulk of things that I have observed through both my professional and my personal life.
Ken, thank you so much. I really mean it.
I
Oh,
appreciate
wonderful, Dr. Goldberg.
Great, it really
Just
was. And
very
I love the communication part of it especially, which is
Okay.
really important.
Well, and as they say I know when I was in Al-Anon, take what you want, and leave the rest, something like that.
It's correct.
Whatever's helpful, I hope it's
You got
helpful.
it right.
So,
Yeah,
but
What you want, leave the rest. Thank
exactly.
you so much. I really mean it.
Yes.